Neon Genesis Evangelion 1995 inspired an entire generation of an unlikely protagonists who are really reluctant to get into the giant robots they are meant to pilot. And we're grateful for that. Today in this video, I'm going to be talking about 3 anime that are clearly inspired by Hideaki Anno's Neon Genesis Evangelion. So grab your cup and get in the robot because it's time to spill the anime tea. The Evangelion series is known for its religious references, its really in-depth look at the human psyche and how fragile and broken it is, as well as, of course, giant robots. All things that inspired plenty of other series that came after it to try to follow in its footsteps. Let's start off with number 1, which is Eureka 7, my personal favorite anime. Not too unsimilar to Evangelion, Eureka 7 starts off with a boy who is reluctantly thrown into a situation where he has to pilot a giant robot alongside a beautiful girl and ends up joining this renegade organization who is fighting against the government, turning his normal life upside down. Even though, of course, there are some notable similar elements to Evangelion, such as, the giant robot and the beautiful girls, there are other really specific details that match up with the 1995 series, such as the complex look at human relationships and how people connect and interact with one another when they are coming from different walks of life. Also, how they deal with each other when they are placed in really hard, terrible situations like war and death and violence, which both shows do a great job of diving into. They also have similar characters, not only similar in how they act, but also similar in how they look. If you take Eureka 7's Eureka and Evangelion's Rei and put them right next to each other, you can see a lot of the similarities. They both have this greenish, minty hair. They are both really quiet and reserved. Also, if you look at Anemone from Eureka 7 and Asuka from Evangelion, you can see some similarities in their personalities, as well as the fact that they both have longer hair, whereas Eureka and Rei both had shorter hair. Plus, having that kind of dynamic of one main male character and 2 girl characters in the background. The major differences between Evangelion and Eureka 7. So Eureka 7 is mostly a love story. Unlike Evangelion, which mostly focuses on Shinji himself and his kind of going through different relationships with other people and how he is affected by the relationship with his father, the relationship with Asuka and Rin, and with each of the different people in his life. In Eureka 7, it's about 2 characters mostly, which is Renton and Eureka. We mostly follow Renton, see most of the things through his lens, but we also get to see character development and growth through Eureka as well, and how they develop with one another. Eureka 7 is mostly focused on war and how that affects people, and also growing up and connecting with another person on a intimate level that's not just physical. Speaking of connecting with people, Eureka 7 focuses heavily on relationships rather than the individual. In Evangelion, Shinji is the individual that everything is being processed through, that the audience sees the world through. And in Eureka 7, we're kind of seeing it through a couple different people's perspectives and how they interact with one another, whether it's through romantic relationships or through family or familiar relationships, from grandfather to grandson to father to son to sister to brother to brother to brother. There's lots of different types of relationships being explored there. Before I move on to the other 2 series on this list, make sure you like this video if you're enjoying it so far. Let me know what kind of content you guys like and if I should keep making more videos like this one. Let's move on to the second one, which is Darling in the Franxx. Darling in the Franxx is an interesting anime, to say the least. But if you take a look at its bare bones and compare it to Evangelion, you can clearly see that the directors were definitely influenced by Hideaki Anno and his creation. Starting off again with the similar characters, there are very similar characters in each of these series that kind of line up with the characters from Evangelion. Specifically, 02 in Darling in the Franxx is really, really similar to Asuka from Evangelion. The first time I saw Darling in the Franxx before I watched Evangelion, and the first time I saw Asuka on the screen and how she spoke and her personality, I was immediately reminded of 02. Also, the fact that on Asuka's suit, when she's in the mecha for the first time, there's a 02 on her suit, and 02 in Darling in the Franxx is literally called 02, so I feel like that is just a direct nod to Evangelion Plus, again, the whole concept of aliens, we can't have giant robots without having aliens, and they are not in short supply in any of the series that are mentioned on this list. You know, that whole intergalactic battle that goes on in the series, and the different kinds of creatures and people creatures from space that Darling and the Franxx try to cram into a single season of anime. And of course, you have the boy who's just trying to figure it all out while trying to pilot a robot, figure out his emotions. Yeah, just try to be a teenager all at the same time. It's always a fun time to see an existential crisis in a teenage boy in mecha anime. Again, the major differences in Darling and the Franxx is that, number one, it's also a love story, similar to Eureka 7, which I feel like it also was heavily inspired by. Especially 02's, you know, pink hair, kind of similar to Anemone's from Eureka 7. And both of their personalities being based off of Asuka, who has red hair. It just, you know, it's all there. It all adds up. But like I said, Darling and the Franxx is a love story between Hiro and 02, and seeing their relationship grow throughout the series is mostly what the show focuses on. Again, unlike Evangelion, which is mostly focused on Shinji and his deterioration throughout the series. The show also focuses heavily on relationships over the individual, as we see other characters who are in various different romantic relationships with each other. The main characters of the group, there's multiple kids, multiple teenagers who live together and have to pilot robots together. So their relationships with one another kind of feels more like a, you know, American teenage rom-com film in a way, but also does a decent job of just exploring how the characters change with one another and how they deal with the situations that they're given and what they learn about humanity and themselves through their relationships with each other, which is probably the best part of Darling and the Franxx, before they started to go into that intergalactic whatever the heck they were trying to do towards the end. The third anime on this list, and my second favorite from this list, is Gurren Lagann. Gurren Lagann also follows a young boy who suddenly finds himself piloting a giant robot. Who would have guessed? He lives underground with his big brother figure, who is not actually his blood brother, Kamina, and they end up escaping, going above ground, and finding these giant robots, which they use to fight the creatures who live above ground and have been suppressing the human race. A big theme of Gurren Lagann is relationships between male characters, which is also a big theme in Evangelion. As we could see in Evangelion with Shinji and his father, their tense relationship and mostly sad and destructive relationship is explored in that series, as well as Shinji's relationship with Kaoru, you know, my favorite character from the show, if you can't tell by my shirt, and other male characters that appear in Shinji's life throughout the show, including his friends and things like that. And the same is true for Gurren Lagann, but mostly we focus on one relationship between two brother-like characters, between Kamina and Simone. And mostly Kamina's influence on Simone and the steps that he takes throughout the rest of his life based off of what Kamina kind of taught him about being himself and being true to who he is. Also similar to Evangelion, Gurren Lagann explores the concept of having to live up to an ideal based off of someone else's past experiences or past work. I forgot to mention this in Eureka 7, but that is also the case for Eureka 7 as well. Kind of like following in someone's footsteps after they're gone, or trying to be as good as them, since you are, in these cases, their sons. Sons trying to live up to their fathers, in Gurren Lagann, a brother trying to live up to his older brother. Speaking of brotherly love, let's move on into the major differences between Gurren Lagann and Evangelion. I kind of touched on them a little bit, following Simone as he's trying to live up to what Kamina taught him, the values that he taught him, and how to be more confident in who he is as a person and do what he has to do to save the world. Also, unlike the other series on this list, it focuses on friendship overall more than romance. There is a main romantic interest in this series, and the main romantic interest is also an alien girl with greenish hair. In Gurren Lagann, there's a really big focus on friendship and overcoming obstacles together as a group, and relying on other people. Whereas, again, Evangelion is a focus on oneself and trying to overcome things by oneself, trying to understand relationships through the lens of one person. Overall, Gurren Lagann is great for just seeing a different perspective on like these relationships between men that is not solely guided by a relationship between a father and a son. If you haven't already, make sure you like this video if you enjoyed it, and make sure to subscribe if you want more content like this where I talk about and recommend different types of anime series, as well as break down different shows and anime as a medium itself. My name is Phoenix, this has been the Anime Tea, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!